Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Show. I've got Douglas Elliott with me tonight. He wrote yesterday really quite a interesting and soulful article about what happened on Tuesday night in the United States. And Douglas, number one, I really, found what you wrote very interesting, but also the comments from your friends. Some that were pleased, but the vast majority that were very worried. Tell me, what motivated you to sit down and write publicly how you thought things went so poorly and why things went so poorly? And then I thought the most interesting thing is that you had a very deep cynicism about American democracy and its institutions. And then you complained and said that the saddest thing for you is the failure of the American judiciary to protect American democracy from Trump. Tell me why you
Right.
wrote this and what you're thinking today about what happened on Tuesday.
Sure. So I think every Canadian pays attention to American elections because, as I think it was said, it's like a mouse sleeping next to an elephant. We're very affected by what happens there. But I've always taken a particular interest in it because my maternal grandmother was born in the United States, and I still have relatives there. I have many friends there. I'm a member of the American Bar Association. I'm a lawyer, so I've taken great interest, and I've also watched Trump's career very closely because he is a renegade and a revolutionary, and we used to think he was an aberration because he was a celebrity who had no political career, who went into politics, and then did what he said he was going to do and started upending the American system. And I followed his legal troubles. There's no president who's been to court more often than Donald Trump, including criminal charges related to the last election. So I've become increasingly concerned about Trump, reading the court decisions, reading the Mueller report. I don't think any Canadian read the Mueller report, but I did. And I'm very concerned about him, and not just him, but his movement. If it was just one guy, you wouldn't care. But I've been very concerned about his movement. I was very worried that he was going to win the election, and he did. Not only did he win the election, but he has control of the Senate of the United States and may very well have control of the House of Representatives, which gives him complete control over the American federal government. So he will be able to proceed with his agenda unimpeded.
You say to some extent this reflects a deep cynicism about American democracy and its institutions. Although Trump is a billionaire and very much part of the elite, he has always portrayed himself as an outsider, crusading
Yeah.
against the elite. There's a deep disconnect within the traditional political class in the USA. We're still among a wide swath that includes J.D. Vance. There is disconnect within American constitutional democracy as we know it. Many seem to believe that all politicians are just as bad as Trump. Why?
Yeah.
Why this discontent? Why would people
It's
vote for such a flawed character?
it's really hard to understand. There's two aspects to it. The first aspect is the nature of Republican politics. I'm old enough to remember Richard Nixon, and when Richard Nixon was exposed as a criminal who had broken the law in order to get elected to the presidential office through a criminal conspiracy that was run out of the White House, half of Republicans still supported him as president. So the Republican Party was already at that point deeply tribal and willing to support a criminal. I saw one of uh, Nixon's advisors quoted today in the New York Times as saying, the Americans will always choose a crook over a fool. Um, and it's very clear that in Republican politics, that's certainly true. And Donald Trump, after January the 6th, he managed to seize control of the Republican Party and, like any good autocrat, stamped out any opposition to his leadership of that party. Anyone who stood up against him was punished, was pushed out, silenced, and everyone who wanted to get ahead in the Republican Party had to kiss the ring. And even if you kiss the ring, as Nikki Haley found out, that might not be enough. So he has transformed the Republican Party into, which was previously a party that was deeply loyal to the leader most of the time, into a cult of the personality in the classic sense. The second part of it is, and this is more troubling, when you read surveys, you see there's a lot of Americans who feel, and there's two types of them. There's an intellectual group like J.D. Vance who feel that American democracy is now corrupt and it's aged out and it needs to be replaced with some kind of autocratic system. We've got professors at law schools writing essays about this, which is very disturbing to me. But there's always been this thought that, well, like the Roman Republic, eventually the republic gets corrupt and you replace the system with a Caesar, a dictator who runs everything. So there's that intellectual group of far right, I will call them crypto fascists like J.D. Vance, who think it's time for dictatorship because the republic has had its day. But there's also, in fairness, there's a wide group of young men in particular who have been left behind. Free trade has not worked for them. They don't own stocks. Baby boomers like us have voted again and again for policies that enrich us, lower taxes, closing factories here to buy cheaper goods offshore. When I was a kid, a guy who had a high school diploma could get a good union job at a mine or at a factory. And that's no longer the case for a couple of reasons. One is because of our policies that have promoted offshore manufacturing that's cheaper so that we pay less for our products. And the second is one that's more profound, which is technological change. I grew up in a mining town, and in those days, a mine would take 1,000 men to run it, and they'd all have to go down and work in the mine. Now it's all run by robots and machines, and the guys are up on the surface with computers, and you need a college degree in order to be a miner. So it's very obvious, those young people with high school diplomas feel left behind by our policies, by our society. They're angry, they're disenchanted. We've seen this in other countries. It's what sparked the communist revolution in Russia. It's what sparked the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany. And I'm very concerned. I saw surveys that said more than half of Americans think that American democracy isn't working. And even though many Americans said that democracy was in trouble in the United States, when they looked at their list of priorities for voting, less than 10% of people said that that was a reason to vote for a candidate. They were more concerned about hopefully reducing the price of gas and groceries than they were about preserving their democracy. It's tragic. It's really tragic.
But what that would suggest then is that the Democrats just really didn't listen to and have any strategies for helping these people.
That's absolutely true. Now, in fairness to the Democrats, I will say two things about that. First of all, there are certain factors that were beyond the Democrats' control. We've seen this across the world. There was the pandemic, which caused a lot of people to be psychologically distressed, and a lot of people were put out of work in hotels and restaurants. Anybody who was working in the tourism sector, they were out of work, and it caused a lot of hardship, especially for young people in low-paying jobs. It caused a lot of economic hardship. At the same time, when we came out of the pandemic, we were hit with high inflation and skyrocketing housing costs. So these same people were left behind. And in all of these countries, because of this economic dislocation, people in even poorer countries than our own are trying to get out of their countries and move to some place where they've got a better chance. So every Western democracy is facing this problem of migration that's piling on to the economic problems that they already have and the social discontent. And so all across the world, you're seeing incumbent governments being punished. In the United Kingdom, it was a right-wing government that was thrown out in favor of a left-wing government. So that's not the Democrats' fault. They didn't create inflation. They didn't create the pandemic. They inherited it. But they failed to respond to Trump's message, which was resonating with unemployed young men and young people who are facing high housing costs, people who simply perceived that the country was going in the wrong direction because of the high cost of housing. This is what people were saying in answer to pollsters. Yeah, I care about democracy, but I'm more worried about paying the rent. That's for another day. I've got to figure out how to make ends meet now. And I think Trump is going to solve that for me. And, the Democrats just failed to come to grips with that. They seem to, they never seem to have a message that acknowledged people's pain and had concrete solutions that people could buy into. I thought they had some good policies, like investing in infrastructure and trying to build chips in the United States.
Well, The
But
Economist had as a cover story that it's the best economy in the world.
it is the best economy in the world in general. But you have to, there's two problems there. Number one, some people are being left behind, especially those young people. If you look, it's true that in general, people are doing better in the United States. But if you look at people, young men with high school educations in the United States, their economic status has been dropping steadily over the last number of years. So it's not just that they have a misperception, but the other problem is, let's face it, Donald Trump is the greatest con artist in the history of the United States. He is, or you can be more gentle with him and say he's a great salesman. He has managed to persuade people that despite the fact that inflation is down to 2%, unemployment is low, the American economy is the envy of Western democracies, that in fact that everything is horrible. It's the first time, I think, in the history of the United States where an incumbent president the incumbent party has lost the White House when the economy is doing well. And the reason is because people don't perceive the economy to be doing well. The Democrats did a lousy job of selling their policies, and some of their policies obviously didn't resonate with young men in particular.
I've got to ask, on the comments that you got on your post, you had people saying, save this because you're going to have to use it next year when Pierre Poilievre wins, almost, being ecstatic about the idea that it's going to happen again in Canada. And then other people saying, Trudeau and Singh better listen to what you're saying.
Yes, for sure. I think Trudeau and Singh, it's what we've seen all over the world is it's very difficult for incumbent governments to hang on. In this country, Scott Moe and Premier Eby managed to hang on by the skin of their teeth in their provinces. But in other places, you look at New Brunswick, New Brunswick had a very right-wing government and they got thrown out in favor of a progressive government. It's all about punishing the incumbents is what's going on. And the NDP and the Liberals are going to get punished in the next election unless they wake up and smell the coffee and learn the lessons from the American election. One of the lessons Trudeau has already failed to take, which is, I think, one of the mistakes that the Democrats made was knowing how unpopular Joe Biden was. He's one of the most unpopular presidents in the history of the United States. I personally think that's unfair, but it's reality. It's a political reality. He should have stepped aside a long time ago and let someone else come in. And if he had done that, then the Democrats could have brought someone in like Gavin Newsom, who wasn't associated with the Biden administration. It would have been much easier to sell the idea of change with a new leader from outside the existing administration. Trudeau doesn't seem to be getting that message, and if he doesn't, he's going to be doomed, I think. But the NDP and the Liberals need to acknowledge the pain that people are in. Doesn't matter. Sure, inflation is down now too, but the reality is people are paying a huge cost for housing. And I hear it from the young people I know. The ones who have high school diplomas say, your generation screwed me because I don't get I can't get a good paying job anymore. I have to work for a minimum wage at McDonald's. And the people who have university education say, your generation screwed me because when you went to school, you got grants and government subsidized the universities, and I'm $500,000 in debt with student loans, and I will never be able to buy a house because I have to spend all of my money on student loans. And it's your greedy boomer generation that did this to me.
We got to
So
take
this is a revenge of the younger generation on our generation to some extent.
revenge of the younger generation. We got to take a quick break. We're going to come back, and I'm going to ask you about the failure of the American judiciary. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. We're back, everyone. Brian Crombie, Radio Hour, Douglas Elliott talking about the U.S. election. Sir, you wrote, the saddest part for me is the failure of the American judiciary to protect American democracy from Trump. I understand that yesterday the American Justice Department dropped their suits and Jack Smith was fired.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's happened, but I will tell you that that certainly will happen once Trump is sworn in. The reality is that the American president has control over the Department of Justice, and he can fire Jack Smith. He can stop all of the proceedings that are federal. He cannot stop the state proceedings. There are state proceedings in New York and in Georgia. However, every American legal expert that I've heard from has said that they believe the state courts will stay. They won't dismiss, but they will at least stay all proceedings against Donald Trump as long as he's the sitting president of the United States. So I think those cases are, for all effective purposes, dead. And I think it's really sad. This whole comeback of Donald Trump began right after January 6th, when the American Senate failed to convict him on his impeachment charges. They should have impeached him, and we wouldn't be in this predicament. They lost their nerve. But that's a political issue. It's perhaps not surprising that they failed to convict him, because it hasn't happened in American history. But the judiciary, they were very aggressive in convicting the January 6th insurrectionists.
But not Trump.
Trump wasn't charged. Eventually, Trump was charged. He got criminal charges all over the place, but he played all kinds of games, delayed things, and then he got that ridiculous ruling from the United States Supreme Court, because he stacked the judiciary, and that said that as if anything's an official act, doesn't matter if he orders the assassination of his opponent, as long as he's doing it officially, you cannot prosecute him. It basically turns, one of the judges says it turns the president of the United States into a king. I would say it turns him into a dictator with absolute power, because even kings have some constraints.
So we always thought no one was above the law. Do we no longer believe that?
That's not true anymore. That's not true anymore in the United States. The president of the United States is above the law, and now Donald Trump is going to be the president of the United States. And he's always carried on as if he was above the law. That's the way he's been. And I'll tell you, there's a famous incident back in the early days of Adolf Hitler. He was put on trial for organizing an insurrection in Bavaria, and he was convicted. And because he was an Austrian citizen, he should have been kicked out of Germany. But the judges lost their nerve. They said they knew he was politically popular, and they said, well, he's a patriot, he was well-intentioned, we're not going to deport him. And we know what happened in that story. In this case, every American judge with half a brain knew the threat that Donald Trump posed to American democracy. They're supposed to be part of the government. They should have been pulling out all the stops to get that man in jail and disqualified from running for office. And they did the exact opposite. They allowed him to manipulate the system to get reelected. And now he's going to transform the judiciary. He's got control of the Senate. He's going to stack it with young people who are totally loyal to Donald Trump, who will be there long after he's dead and carrying out his philosophy and his policies forever and creating headaches for future Democratic administrations, if there ever are any. And he, of course, will be immune from any kind of oversight by the American judiciary because it will be full of his sycophants. It'll be a cast of Rudolph Giuliani clones sitting in those judicial spots. Right now, the United States Supreme Court has the lowest confidence rating that it's ever had. It's at 25% of Americans have confidence in the Supreme Court of the United States. I'm going to bet that that's going to go down in future because people are going to have the same cynicism about judges that they have about politicians. The reason Donald Trump was able to get elected is because a lot of people in the United States think that every politician is just as corrupt and dishonest as Donald Trump. So it's the choice between one crook and another crook. So you might as well choose the crook that you think is going to put more money.
But more than that, in your final paragraph, it sounds like you think that they actually do want a dictator. They do want an autocrat. You say they want a Caesar.
They do. There was a survey done earlier this year where there was something like 30 or 40% of Americans said having a strong leader is more important than democracy. And I think the fact that 51% of Americans voted for Donald Trump indicates that that number has just gone up over the course of this year. They're okay with him being a dictator as long as gas is cheap. That's really what I take from this election. And that's very sad. Now, let's be clear. There's millions of Americans who voted for Kamala Harris. And there are some Americans who voted for Donald Trump who think, I think rather naively, that he's not going to do what he said he's going to do. But there are millions of people like J.D. Vance who think a dictatorship is just what America needs right now.
Douglas Elliott, thanks very much for sharing your views with us. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. It's going to be an interesting 4 years. Let me tell you, interesting 4 years. Good night, everybody.